In this lecture, you are going to learn about Mediterranean trade and European expansion, the explorations of Columbus, Europe in the Age of Exploration, and Spanish exploration and conquest. Centuries before Columbus, the Crusades linked Europe with the wealth, power, and knowledge of Asia. During this time, Europeans rediscovered or adopted Greek, Roman, and Muslim knowledge. The hemispheric dissemination of goods and knowledge not only sparked the Renaissance, but fueled long-term European expansion. Asian goods flooded European markets, created a demand for new commodities. This trade created vast new wealth, and Europeans battled one another for the trade supremacy. From the 12th through the 15th centuries, Italian merchants dominated the lucrative trade of exotic goods from Persia, Asia Minor, India, and Africa to the Mediterranean. However, by the end of the 15th century, the economic insecurity caused by the Black Death prompted a few people to take greater chances, including embarking on dangerous sea voyages through uncharted waters to points unknown. At the same time, European nation-states consolidated under the authority of powerful kings. Monarchs who hoped to enrich their dynasties and enlarge their realms sponsored these expeditions. Scientific and technological advances, including navigational aids, helped set the stage for exploration. Portugal, with less than 2% of the population of Christian Europe, took the lead in exploration between 1415 and 1460. The most influential advocate of Portuguese exploration was Prince Henry the Navigator, son of the Portuguese king. He collected the latest information about sailing techniques and geography, supported new crusades against the Muslims in the area, and sought fresh sources of trade. The Portuguese did not comprehend the immensity of Africa or the length or shape of its shoreline. Explorers had to develop new sailing techniques and new ships, notably the caravel, to complete their voyages. But eventually, the Portuguese will be successful in establishing a new route to Asia around the African continent. The first explorer to accomplish this will be Vasco da Gama. In 1498, Gama will establish a route around Africa to Asia. Portugal's African exploration during the 15th century broke the monopoly of the old Mediterranean trade with the East and led to the development of sailing methods later employed by Columbus and others. Soon after, the Portuguese stumbled on several islands off the coast of Europe and Africa, including the Canary Islands and the Cape Verde Islands. These islands became training grounds for the later colonization of the Americans and saw the first large-scale cultivation of sugar by enslaved laborers. Sugar was a difficult crop. It required tropical temperatures, daily rainfall, unique soil conditions, and a 14-month growing season, and a large labor force. Initially, the Portuguese enslaved the local natives to work on the sugar plantations, but their lack of immunity to European diseases and working conditions disseminated their population, and they perished soon after Europeans arrived. Thus, the Portuguese will begin to look at another labor source to work on their plantations. In Africa, Portuguese sailors and merchants had recently established good relations with powerful African kingdoms. Slavery had long existed among African societies. African leaders traded war captives who, by custom, forfeited their freedoms in battle for Portuguese guns, iron, and manufactured goods. In the 1460s, the Portuguese used African slaves to develop their sugar plantations on the Cape Verde Islands, inaugurated an association between enslaved Africans and plantation labor that would be transplanted to the New World. Despite popular belief, Columbus did not discover the earth was round. In fact, he was not the first or only one to believe that the earth was spherical. Most Europeans and Asians believed that the earth was round during this time period. They also knew that while it was therefore technically possible to reach Asia by sailing west from Europe, the earth's vast size would doom even the greatest caravels to starvation and thirst long before they ever reached their destination. As shown in this primary source, Columbus also shared this idea that the earth was round. However, Columbus argued against the idea that the earth's size was too large to be able to sail around the world and reach Asia. He believed the earth was small enough that ships would be able to reach the East Indies by sailing west. As we will learn, Columbus' calculations will be wrong. However, on his quest to prove this theory, he will find something else that will change the course of history forever. After unsuccessfully shopping around for his proposed expedition in several European courts, he convinced Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain to provide him 3 small ships, which set sail in 1492. On October 12, 1492, after 2 months at sea, Columbus' first voyage landed him on the tiny Caribbean island about 300 miles north of the eastern tip of Cuba, which he claimed for Isabella and Ferdinand of Spain, and named it San Salvador. Columbus, assuming he was in the East Indies near Japan or China, called the island's inhabitants Indians. The islanders called themselves Taínos and were an agricultural people who cultivated a variety of crops and worshipped ancestral spirits whom they believed inhabited natural objects like trees and stones. The Taínos will be the first people Columbus encountered after making landfall in the New World. It quickly became clear that the two groups did not understand each other. Columbus' perception of the Taínos was shaped by European attitudes, ideas, and expectations, such as the Taínos' perceptions of the Europeans were no doubt colored by their own culture. In this primary source, you can read Columbus' version of his first encounter. In sum, they took everything and gave up what they had very willingly, but it seemed to me that there were people very poor on everything. All of them go around as naked as their mothers bore them, and the women also, although I did not see more than one young girl. And all those that I saw were young people, for none did I see of more than 30 years of age. Their hair is coarse, almost like the tail of a horse, and short. They did not carry arms, nor are they acquainted with them, because I showed them swords, and they took them by the edge, and through ignorance cut themselves. They have no iron. Their javelins are shafts without iron, and some of them have at the end a fish tooth, and others of other things. I believe that they will become good Christians very easily, for it seems to me that they have no religion. Our Lord pleasing, at the time of my departure, I will take 6 of them from here to your Highness. Based on this primary source, one can argue that Columbus' impression of Taínos was shaped by his European notions of wealth. He also seemed to establish early on his superiority over the Taínos and his intent to enslave them and convert them to Christianity. Although it is not mentioned in this expert, upon this first encounter, he noticed some Taínos wearing small gold ornaments. Presuming there was more gold in the region, Columbus left 39 Spaniards at a military fort on Hispaniola to find and secure the source of the gold, while he returned to Spain with a dozen captured and branded Taínos. Columbus arrived to Spain with great acclaim and quickly worked to outfit a return voyage. Spain's New World motives were clear from the beginning. If outfitted for a return voyage, Columbus promised the Spanish crown, gold, and slaves. Columbus was outfitted with 17 ships and over 1,000 men to return to the West Indies. Still believing he had landed in the East Indies, he promised to reward Isabella and Ferdinand's investment. But when material wealth proved slow in coming, the Spanish embarked on a vicious campaign to extract every possible ounce of wealth from the Caribbean. The Spanish disseminated and enslaved the Taínos' population. Within a few generations, the whole island had been depopulated and a whole population of native people exterminated. Columbus' voyage will spark an age of European exploration that will change the world. Other explorers will try to reach Asia by sailing west after Columbus. Notable mentions include John Cabot. Cabot would try to find a route to Asia for King Henry VIII of England in 1497. To make a long story short, he was not successful in finding a route to Asia. However, we do know that he was able to land somewhere in North America. Now, for a long time, the consensus has been that Cabot and his crew were lost at sea and they never made it back home to Europe. However, there are some historians who believe there is evidence that suggests they survived and returned home. Either way, after Cabot, the English will be too preoccupied with domestic affairs and will not be a major player in exploring and conquering the New World until many years later, when a new monarch takes the throne. Spain and Portugal, however, will become the leaders in this new age of exploration. As Spain and Portugal's competing claims to new lands grew in the Western Hemisphere, they were forced to negotiate a treaty to avoid conflict between the two powers. The Treaty of Tordesillas was signed in 1494. The treaty drew an imaginary line 1,100 miles west of the Canary Islands. Land discovered west of the line belonged to Spain, while Portugal claimed the land to the east. With the Treaty of Tordesillas signed, Pedro Álvares Cabral would sail to claim more land for Portugal. He would sail in the 1500s with the mission to find a new route to Asia. He will land in what is modern-day Brazil and will then go around Africa towards India. Another notable mention will be Ferdinand Magellan. He will launch an expedition for Spain that will last from 1519 to 1522. Like other explorers before him, Magellan's goal was to find a route to Asia by sailing west. He set out from Spain in 1519 with a fleet of 5 ships. The voyage was long and dangerous, and only one ship returned home 3 years later. Magellan will be killed in the Philippines by the natives when he tried to convert them to Christianity. And only 18 of the fleet's original crew of 270 will return home. Magellan's journey, however, discovered what he called Mar Pacifico, the Pacific Ocean. And it was the first expedition to go around the world. Proving once and for all that you can in fact reach Asia by sailing west. However, as some had predicted earlier, it was a long and exhausting journey. And by then, they also figured out that it was probably not the best way to get to Asia. Nevertheless, European expeditions to the Americas will continue. The motive, however, was no longer to find a route to Asia, but to convert, plunder, and conquer. That is all for now. Please stay tuned for the next video lectures.